Black people are not going back to the era of enslavement or the era of Jim Crow. It's not happening. You can say all you want. First of all, also, like, executive orders are not laws, no matter how many times he says it. These are just, they're not. And 78% of what he's doing is, and I just made that number up, but is illegal. And hopefully at some point the courts decide to put on their big boy and big girl pants and do something about it. We're also seeing a profound amount of cowardice from our elected officials and the judiciary branch. So I'm just disgusted all around.
Welcome to Thinkers on Times Radio, the show where big ideas meets bold conversation. We try and have longer form, more nuanced conversations about all the big issues that are around the world today. Today's guest is Roxane Gay, best-selling writer, cultural critic, one of the most fearless voices on identity, feminism, and power. There's always lots to talk about in those areas. A UK court recently drew the legal lines around what it's meant to be a woman, what a woman is. And Roxane has got very clear opinions on that. Who decides? How does society cope with ambiguity? How does society structure itself where different rights can be balanced in an appropriate fashion? These are all difficult, sometimes nuanced, sometimes emotional issues that we're going to try and find a way of picking ourselves through over the next half an hour or so. So I'm delighted to say Roxane Gay joins us now. Roxane, hello, thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you for having me.
It's a great pleasure. In the UK, where I am at the moment, there's been an awful lot of conversation after the Supreme Court decided what a woman is. A woman is a biological woman. Have you been following that court case? Have you been reacting to it? What's your reaction to it?
I'm disappointed for sure. I don't think this is something that actually helps women. I don't think that it is fair for the legal system to make life harder for people who are already incredibly vulnerable. And we clearly have a new understanding of gender, and that gender exists on a spectrum, and all of us may not fully understand it, but it's not for us to understand. I just don't see how we can deny other people's realities, their truths, their identities, their womanhood. So it's disappointing, and I always hate that people use women and women's safety, for example, as cover for bigotry. Just say you're a bigot, but don't say you're doing this to protect women, because if you were doing this to protect women, you would also care about things like maternal mortality and making sure that women have protections when they leave marriage and find themselves in poverty. Like, let's just be real.
Well, what do you say to all the feminists, the women who say they do care about women, and they do feel very keenly that there are certain areas where they feel women's rights are being compromised? That's the argument they would put to you, Roxane. They would say there are some spaces, not all spaces, not every part of the conversation. They will say there are some areas like refuges, women's refuges, or sport, a couple of areas where very legitimate rights, the rights of a trans person and the rights of a woman, might come up against one another, and we have to find ways of resolving those things. They would say that it's important within that conversation to say women's rights need to be protected. And they would say that's not bigoted, that's looking after a gender that's been discriminated against for millennia.
I would disagree, especially with regard to the sports issue. In the United States, there's all of this hubbub about trans women in sports. And at the college level, there are 10. We're talking about 10 athletes out of more than 10,000. It's like, it's embarrassing to even say out loud. It's so disproportionate. And when you look at the political rhetoric and the way that the media covers this, they never actually point out the real numbers. Now, I understand that this is a complex issue, but it's 10 athletes. And I think it's really disingenuous to make this seem like women in sport everywhere are in danger of trans women doing better than them. It hasn't happened yet. And so it's a bogeyman, and it's unfortunate. And I think that we can create space for biological women and trans women. I really do. I think that
Do
we
you?
have enough energy. I do. I do. And if we can't, then what are we doing as a society? Truly. If we cannot create safe space for all women to thrive, then my goodness, our humanity is severely compromised.
And I, and maybe the question around sport is it's so few people, so few trans people involved in these spaces. Does it need to be that complicated? I mean, I can't. There's not a fundamental human right to compete in a sport and at an elite level. And if that is an area where there is some concern, but as you say, in the greater scheme of things, it might not be huge concern. Could it not be relatively straightforward that people who are born biologically male do carry with them some sporting advantages? That seems to be more or less accepted, particularly those who go through male puberty have some sort of athletic advantage. If that is the case, then can we not be honest about it and say this is not compromising every other part of a trans person's life, and that should be respected and looked after, and these are people often with other difficulties that need to be helped and succored. But in that one specific area, if you've gone through male puberty, maybe you can't compete against biological women, and why is that a difficult concept to land if we're making the arguments on the other side of the ball as well?
I don't think it's a difficult concept to land. I think any rational person absolutely understands biological determinism. But I also believe it's more complicated than that. And I just don't think that we can unilaterally tell trans women, you don't get to do this. The minute we start taking rights away from any group, we soften the ground for rights to be taken away from others. It's always a
But it
slippery slope.
but is it a right? I guess, Roxanne, it's an interesting question. That
No,
there's
no, of course not. It's not a right. It's a choice. People choose to compete at elite levels. Um, but again, if you want to use the word ability instead of right, I mean, I just think that it's a slippery slope when we start to restrict what people can and can't do because of their gender. Um, we would not have it in the other way, in the opposite direction. So why are we allowing it here? And in addition to the realities that, yes, if you go through male puberty, you have a certain advantage. Some of that advantage is diminished by the estrogen that trans women take. But we never talk about that part. And look, I'm not a biologist, and I'm also not an athlete. And so it's easy for me to opine on this issue because it's literally never going to affect me. But I just, I would always rather err on the side of empathy. And I don't like when we cherry pick certain examples and say, oh, this is because. And we've also seen this with, for example, Castor Semenya, who is a woman biologically, but also has high testosterone levels and has, in many ways, been banned from participating in the sport that she excels at. And that's what I mean by the slippery slope. We already see it. And so when we start getting into testosterone levels, it affects biological women too. Like, you're going to get bitten by the snake eventually. And so clearly, anti trans feminists clearly have the upper hand on this issue. But I just, I think that we should protect trans women. And I think we should protect them in every realm. It seems like a very complex existence that we should not have to make more complex because of bigotry.
I'm so interested because you're not a biologist, you are a feminist. You're a very well known um, feminist who's written lots of very thoughtful things on the subject of feminism. What's your relationship like with other feminists? Because, good people can disagree here, and there will be some very proud feminists who really care so deeply about women's issues and the fear of being erased by men and the concern of predatory men and how men have wrecked their lives, who want to stand up so strongly for biological women that they fall on a different line to you when it comes to the issue of trans people. How do you, is there any place where good people can disagree on this issue, or is it always bigot versus bigot by the other's estimation? I'm just fascinated by the fact that in the end, you all want to stick up for women, feminism. That's what feminism is about. But it feels like how do you manage that? Do you manage that? Has that been something that's successfully been managed? Do you think?
Well, of course. I mean, we're people. It's not that hard. But again, you're framing the conversation disingenuously. You're belaboring under the notion that trans women are men. Trans women are not sitting around here menacing women. They're just not. And anytime someone offers up some red herring story about this, the details are incredibly vague, and they're like, "Oh, this one time." It's all anecdotal. Trans women are not lurking in bathrooms. And in most of Europe, bathrooms are single gender. So, like here in the US, everyone has made a big thing about bathrooms. And, like, go to Sweden and you'll see that bathrooms are in general unisex and anyone uses every bathroom. And life is very functional there. So, where are these trans women who are menacing women? Now,
And there are some.
there are criminals who may be doing some sort of disguising and using this as cover to be a predator, but those aren't trans women. Those are criminals. And so you have to like identify what we're talking about instead of painting trans women with this broad brush and saying, oh, but some of them. No, the people that are doing that are not trans.
Well, there's an interesting example in Scotland actually, where there was a man who was a rapist who then said effectively, I mean, I don't, I mean, and as you say, it's possible to get inside people's brains entirely, but ultimately was born a male, was a male rapist, and was put in a woman's prison because that person identified as a woman later on in the process. And that became a really igniting story in this country because a lot of people said, who were on the other side of the argument, that could never happen, and it did happen. And that was seen, plausibly enough, I think it's an example of where the rules were not working. Because if someone commits a male crime like rape and then ends up in a woman's prison, that can't, I don't think, be intuitively right to many people.
No, it can't. And there's no easy answer for something like that. Like that's clearly, but again, you can name one story. When you can name one story, it's not an endemic problem. So let's deal with that one person. Maybe this person needs to be put, I don't know where you put someone who does that. I just don't know how we means test, are you really trans? Though clearly it's deeply suspect that someone who's a rapist all of a sudden decides, oh, I'm a woman. Are you? After all of the harm you have caused to women? Like, we can absolutely apply common sense. But let's not suggest that one instance is indicative of a danger that we all need to be worried about. If that were the case, we would be pulling one instances of all sorts of things and never leaving our homes. And so I just ask for perspective, for thinking about scale and proportion, and also common sense. And I think most feminists would look at a situation like that and try to have empathy, but also have common sense. I actually think rapists should be put on a little island of their own, regardless of gender, and like, you guys stay there and work it out. I don't think rapists belong with the rest of us.
I think you used a really interesting phrase there, Roxanne, which is how do you means test how trans someone is? And that feels like a very fundamental question when it comes to young people as well. This issue of at what point, and this is another thing that people wrestle with, again, I think with good intentions where there's not always a straightforward answer, at what point when someone says they have a different view of their gender seems to be fluid, at what point do you support that? At what point do you challenge it fairly to test to see if it is a lifestyle they really want to adopt? And we've really struggled with that in this country. And there was clearly a point at which lots of children were, I suspect, the consensus view by some would be, they were encouraged too quickly to pursue their intentions to change gender. But at some point, you have to recognise that some people will need the support. Others, it might just be a passing part of their growing up. How do you manage it when it's talking about teenagers, because you don't want to do something that's hard to reverse or hard to change after the event. And that again strikes me as something that's not entirely straightforward. The means testing of being trans, as you put it, for a 15-year-old who might be confused and interested and exploring all sorts of things. How do you do that?
Well, I mean, I can't speak to what's going on in the UK because I don't know how the UK healthcare system works, but I can say that in the United States, there is a system in place. Now, are there faults in that system? I'm sure there are. But in general, that child is going to receive lots and lots of counseling, but they're also going to receive health care. And they're also not going to have any sort of assistance in transitioning that's permanent because nothing should be permanent for a 15-year-old. We've all been 15. And I don't ever want to say that they're confused, but I also know that sometimes what you feel at 15 is not what you feel at 25. And so I don't know of any feminist or frankly any human being who is advocating, for example, for surgical transition for anyone under the age of 18. And I would never advocate for that just because children are young and you're developing and you don't know who you are or what you want. But I have met many a trans youth, and 99 times out of 100, they are crystal clear on who they are, and they are crystal clear on how they want to live. And so when their parents make it easier for them to start living as their true gender, I'm not even talking about medicine. I'm talking about, for example, wearing the clothes that they feel comfortable with, being identified by the name and gender that they are. Um, why not? It doesn't hurt anything. I mean, I'm sure it hurts the parents because you think you have one child and then you learn that you have another. But we all change. And I think most parents confront that, even though they may not do it on the scale of gender transition. Um, and because I don't have children, I don't purport to know how challenging that is, though with having friends with trans children, I do know it's challenging. They do talk about it, and they do talk about the sort of grieving process of having to say goodbye for now and maybe forever to my daughter and hello to my new son. Or not really my new son, my son who's been here all along, but who I didn't necessarily know was a son. But that's not my business. I think these are family issues. And again, why are we dictating how parents deal with their children and support their children? Um, but yeah, I like again, I don't know anyone who would be like, yeah, let's do some surgery here. Yeah.
Do you buy the argument at all? I've got a 16-year-old daughter, and
Hmm.
she it far more than when I was at school. They talk about things about being fluid, and her friends are variously. They would identify as bisexual. They sometimes that I think they're veering in one direction, and sometimes they're veering in another direction, with
Hmm.
both gender and sexuality, and that seems much more common now. Um, is there a sort of I don't even know how to put this in a way that I'm 45, so when I was a teenager 30 years ago, it was never discussed, and therefore it didn't seem like it existed. Now, quite clearly,
Hmm.
uh, bisexuality and homosexuality would have existed, but no one spoke about it. Are we
Hmm.
seeing, because people talk about it, does it happen more? Or are just people more aware, in your view, of something that was always there? Because the rise of this issue of fluidity, particularly among children, which may or may not lead to being genuinely trans by the end of it, who knows? That seems to be more of a new thing. Is it a new thing, or
I
is it
don't
just
think
newly talked about?
it's newly talked about. It's not a new thing. However, I mean, I'm 50 years old, and so I too like I'm teaching a class this semester, and of my 12 students, six of them are trans or non-binary. That's not a statistical representation. I mean, that they're clearly overrepresented. Now, I'm a feminist teaching a feminist class, so there's some self-selection there. But I also just think it's safer for young people to embrace different identities and to try different things and to really explore who they are. It's clearly not that safe given the conversation that we're having, but it's much safer now than it was when you and I were teenagers or children. It's a completely different world. Every time a student introduces themselves or a young person introduces themselves and leads with their pronouns, I'm like, wait, what? And then I'm like, yes, of course, Roxanne, stop being so old. Just say, she, her. And that's the thing. People assume that like, oh, you just have to always be perfect all the time. No, you have to try. You just have to be open. And that's what I try to do as often as possible. I believe people when they tell me who they are, for better and worse. And I also believe in creating spaces for people to be who they are. And maybe they're going to change, for sure. But I can't predict the future. I am not a psychic, and that's not my job. My job is to deal with people in the moment as they are.
I want to ask about the political context, if I might, of where you
Mhm.
are in America, because we are. It's around the 100 days of Donald Trump. The whole world is now affected by Donald Trump. The
Mhm.
tone, the tenor, Donald Trump's approach to various policy issues absolutely infiltrates everywhere else in the world, including the UK. I think it sets the political weather. It controls what people say about certain issues. Do you think, in the area, for example, of diversity, in the area of progressive politics to which you ascribe, has he effectively, for now at least, won? Has he won the
No,
conversation? Has he changed the conversation? Do you think?
absolutely not. He is not changing a goddamn thing. He is ruling by brute force. He is ruling from a place of profound ignorance, stupidity, and bigotry. He is incompetent at a scale that is staggering. And he's right now testing the waters. He's seeing how far can I go? But the idea that he can undo all of the progress of the past, say, 50 years is delusional or delulu, as my nieces would say. It's just not possible. But what he has done is create a climate of fear and a climate of silence. And he is making it deeply unsafe for many vulnerable populations, not the least of which are people who are undocumented. And it's a disgrace. And I don't know how this country overcomes the disgrace of Donald Trump. And it is something that is deeply troubling. And it's also troubling to see how easily certain institutions are capitulating and who are going along with his nonsense. But Black people are not going back to the era of enslavement or the era of Jim Crow. It's not happening. You can say all you want. And first of all, also, like executive orders are not laws, no matter how many times he says it. These are just, they're not. And 78% of what he's doing is, and I just made that number up, but is illegal. And hopefully at some point the courts decide to put on their big boy and big girl pants and do something about it. We're also seeing a profound amount of cowardice from our elected officials and the judiciary branch. So I'm just disgusted all around.
But does it? And the interesting question to me is how much of a mandate he has from the American population. Because the one thing about Donald Trump
He
is
has no mandate.
he doesn't. You don't think he does? Because the argument that's been put
No.
to me before is he didn't hide any of this stuff. He's not doing. He's not got elected and then changed character. He said to the American people, "This is who I am. I'm going to do this, that, and the other." And a majority of people, not a huge majority, but a majority of voters put him in.
A tiny majority put him in, and especially when you look at the popular vote. And 20 million Democrats, for whatever reason, and we can guess at what those reasons were, stayed home. So no, he did not receive a mandate. What he did receive was a bunch of people who are either too lazy to be part of an informed electorate or are actually bigoted. He gave them lots and lots of cover to express all of the bigotry that they feel that they've been oppressed by and that they've been having to like hide. And like they get to air all of their freak flag idiot issues. It's disgusting. But is it a mandate? No. Bigotry doesn't get to be a mandate. I'm sorry, but it does not. Progress is not some like lark or dream where we're like looking for optional things. We're talking about freedom to live. We're talking about the freedom to be safe. We're talking about the right to succeed. without unnecessary gatekeeping and pushback. I'm sorry, these are not um, like flying first class. Okay, this is just the bare minimum. And the fact that we even have to have this conversation and where you can suggest that bigotry is a mandate is appalling. It's just appalling because what you're saying is that some people get to oppress others, and if enough of them want to do it, then it's okay. No, it just isn't.
Well, that's one definition. That's one definition of democracy, Roxanne. That if enough people want to do it, I mean, Hitler was democratically elected. I mean, at the end, there are certain inflection points in history where people vote for stuff, and it might not be the right side of history. It might not be morally acceptable. It might not be the thing that people will judge them correctly for. But the people have a power, and the people are given this power in the democratic system to say, what do you want? And America had Trump in 2016, and they decided 8 years later to have him again. I mean, that itself is a very striking thing.
I think anytime you're like, but Hitler made it okay, you kind of make my argument for me. Um, just because the majority wants something wrong doesn't mean it's acceptable or okay. And um, the majority in this country don't actually want that. And we're going to continue to see lots and lots of evidence of pushback, if not from politicians, then from people. And I hope that Trump doesn't destroy the entire world before that happens. It's not a great time.
Here's a difficult question, and you may completely fundamentally disagree with this, but I'd love your thoughts on it. Does does the progressive movement in America have to look at itself to say, did it move too quickly? Did it try and take things too far? That therefore there's a moderate part of America, there's this moderate center of America, which should be really heading towards progressiveness, but for whatever reason rejected it. And I wonder, things like defund the police or something like that, where an idea that
Come
began in
on.
notions of being progressive pushed people away. Were people pushed away by the progressive movement? Is the question I'm interested in your answer to, Roxanne.
No, they were not. If you are pushed away by equal rights, if you are pushed away by the idea that black people shouldn't be murdered by police, you weren't on our side anyway. We did not move too quickly. We haven't moved quickly enough. I mean, again, you're suggesting that we cater to people who are comfortable and who aren't experiencing oppression, and telling people who are experiencing oppression, hey, just wait your turn because we're not ready yet. We're not comfortable. Come on. Like, let's treat people like adults. For God's sake. I just can't believe we have to, like, even say this. I mean, clearly we do, given the nature of the current political climate, but it isn't progressive politics that alienates people. It is an embrace of bigotry, it is an embrace of prejudice, and an embrace of people who believe that their desire for more should come at the expense of Black people in particular, but also other people of color. And, you know, I'm sorry that people can no longer make 60, 70, 80,000 dollars with just a high school diploma. I wish that were still the case. But I mean, everyone is struggling economically. And the idea that because some white middle class people want to be wealthier than they are, that we should stop progress. Progress isn't what's keeping you from making the money that you want, actually. It's all the billionaires who are not paying their fair share of taxes. And so, again, we have to have these conversations in a way that is honest and that is really getting at the root of what's going on. But if you really think that protesting the police is making someone, and I'm from Omaha, Nebraska, I'm from the middle of the country. I was raised in a very conservative community. I have no problem with conservatives in general. Like, do you? But the idea that protesting the police is making someone in Omaha uncomfortable is just not true. And I even was spending some time in Nebraska recently when I was doing some campaigning for Kamala Harris. And, people there are generally just minding their own business and they're not sitting around fretting about, oh, they want to defund the police. As, by the way, Donald Trump presently is in the process of defunding the FBI. Come on, he's literally defunding the police, and you want to talk about a few protesters? I just refuse.
Well, I understand the argument, Roxane. You've been very gracious and thoughtful over the last half hour with us, with your thoughts. I'm ever so grateful to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. That's it for this episode of Thinkers on Times Radio. Major thanks to Roxane and to you for watching. If you've got thoughts, let us know. Go beneath the line. I'm sure you'll be deeply respectful. You can hit follow, subscribe, and stay tuned for some big thinkers, big ideas as we go on through the year, trying to have slightly more long form, slightly more nuanced conversations. Thank you very much indeed.